Vegas once sold a dream built on mass magic. Now it sells dreams. Buy the package. And the resort fee is an activation fee. Las Vegas once believed it held an unchallengeable privilege. No matter how cheap room rates were, resort fees were still a mandatory expense for visitors. From $50 a night for Wi-Fi, pool, and gym to perks that most guests never use, resort fees have become a symbol of how Vegas squeezes every penny out of visitors' spending. But that seemingly inviolable thing is beginning to crumble. In the context of declining tourist numbers, tighter travel spending, and a wave of discontent spreading on social media, more and more tourists are choosing to boycott Las Vegas because they feel cheated from the moment they book their rooms. Faced with that backlash, some resorts on and off the Strip quietly and then publicly dropped resort fees, which they had previously declared impossible. It's not because they suddenly became kinder, but because the market sent a clear message: either change or continue to lose customers. So, what made Las Vegas concede? Which resorts are breaking the industry's unwritten rules? And is this a sign that Vegas's familiar business model is entering a crisis? In this video, we'll unpack the real reason resorts are making concessions and what that says about the health of the Las Vegas tourism industry. Resorts World has just announced an all-resort, no-fees offer. Book now with no resort fees on select dates, with the message, because your summer getaway should feel like one from start to finish. No resort fees, complimentary parking, all for you. This is not a scam, nor is it false rumor, but it's official news announced by Resorts World itself on its official website. In the context of Vegas, a mega resort having to put no fees on its advertisements is like an airline having to put up a sign saying no baggage fees. It shows the market is reacting strongly to mandatory fees and the feeling of being surprised at checkout. That sounds kind, but essentially, this is a compromise by a business under pressure to bring customers back. Resorts World was not out of the race to maximize profits. Their resort fees, depending on the time of year, can even reach $50-$55 night. The reason for that fee is often linked to the fact that this is a $4.3 billion project, one of the most expensive resorts in the history of the Strip. With such significant capital pressure, they are forced to optimize revenue in every niche, from the casino, rooms, and F&B to mandatory fees, despite being so upset about the high prices. But the problem with Resorts World is, they're not just criticized for being expensive, but also for offering an unmatched experience. Some investigative review articles note that RW experienced numerous operational issues and disappointed customers, from service to technological experiences, making it expensive without being worth it. This hits the resort's fatal value mismatch right on the mark, making the RW feel like a flagship iPhone, but run like a cheap Android, making people angry, not just because it's expensive, but because of the feeling of promising much but delivering little. And the sharp decline in visitors is no longer a general market overview, but directly reflects the drop in RW. The Las Vegas Review-Journal reports that Resorts World continues to post quarterly losses, with Q1 2025 being approximately $48 million, 22% less than 2024, along with declining revenue and EBITDA in Q3 2025, according to reports from parent company Genting. This is the market's delicate way of saying burning money to build is possible, but maintaining cash flow is difficult. When businesses show signs of slowing down, they do two things. They reduce discomfort points by waiving resort fees, offering complimentary parking, and launching promotions, or increase drip pricing in other layers such as restaurant fees, operating fees, minimum spend. And they made a wise move. They agreed to eliminate the resort fee for a period of time, along with offering incentives to keep guests. Waiving the resort fee is a symbolic concession. as the resort fee is designed to be an unavoidable charge. When it disappears, the message sent to customers is, "What was once the default is now negotiable." And tourists are no longer passive pawns in the corporation's billion-dollar gamble. But nothing is absolute. Despite announcing the elimination of resort fees, Resorts World still includes terms and time limits like a contract. After a certain period, RW's next step could be to continue the campaign to reduce resort fees or to revert to the high resort fees of the past. Waive resort fee is not a sign that Vegas is returning to its original kindness. It's a sign that Vegas is having to buy back trust. As more and more people see resort fees as a form of disenfranchisement rather than a legitimate charge. Treasure Island didn't choose to waive fees like Resorts World did. They chose a softer, more sophisticated, and also very Las Vegas-style response. Instead of broadly announcing the elimination of resort fees, Treasure Island took a different approach. The TV ad special deal with an optional resort fee clearly stated in the terms on their website. This isn't a rumor. It's not a social media trick. That's information the resort self-disclosed. And it says something important. They don't want to change their entire policy. But they are forced to change how guests perceive this fee. Formally, optional sounds like an empowerment. But in reality, it turns the visitor experience into a very mundane test. You're not just paying for the room. You're paying for the ability to correctly read the terms and conditions. If you book out of habit, you'll still be charged the resort fee as usual. And if you know the shortcuts and choose the right package, the total cost can be significantly reduced. The result is, the fee doesn't disappear. It's just repackaged into a conditional game where those who understand the rules will be less disadvantaged than those who don't. It's because of this kind of falling price that the concept of junk fees has become a federal policy issue. The FTC has issued a rule targeting unfair or deceptive fees, requiring businesses to clearly display the total true price for short-term lodging reservations and event tickets, rather than letting customers dig through layers of fees at the end of the checkout process. Simply put, consumers shouldn't have to become investigators just to find out how much they'll pay. And the story doesn't stop at theory or the words in the regulations. It has entered reality at the state level, where cases are brought to light with very real numbers. Reuters reported that Texas accused Booking Holdings of obscuring mandatory fees under the general taxes and fees line, and the case ended with a $9.5 million settlement. For tourists, this is the classic scenario drawn in by the low price, only to have the total price revealed later. The feeling of being tricked that everyone has experienced at least once when booking a room or buying a ticket. Treasure Island was not accused of breaking the law in that case. But their optional resort fee model shows the industry is looking to self-regulate in a very clear direction, bringing fees into the light a little more, or at least reducing the feeling of being ambushed by making the fee an option. However, the word optional itself creates a paradox. If the resort fee is truly meant to cover resort service costs, then why can it disappear just because you book the right deal? That question makes many people think that resort fees sometimes function as a revenue lever rather than simply a service charge. Therefore, Treasure Island is not dropping fees, but they are admitting something very clear. Consumers have started asking questions, and the market is forced to respond with a new price structure. So, if a resort fee can be optional in one deal, why is it mandatory in another? Are you paying for a service, or are you paying to avoid an argument at the checkout counter? Treasure Island makes the resort fee an optional charge. But there's a place right on the strip that does something even more unbelievable. They don't charge a resort fee right from the start. Best Western Plus Casino Royale clearly states on its official website, no resort fees and free parking. This is a straightforward, no-nonsense statement, and that's precisely why it immediately piqued the audience's curiosity. Because if a hotel right in the centre of the Strip can survive without a resort fee, then resort fees elsewhere are very likely no longer a matter of being mandatory due to cost, but rather being mandatory due to the business model. This also hits the traveller's aversion to being nickel and dimed. Viewers don't want to be nickel and dimed. They want to see the price they pay. They can accept expensive, but they don't want to feel calculated and led every step of the way. And Casino Royale, by not charging a resort fee from the outset, inadvertently became a very clear test. Transparency can be a competitive advantage, not just an ethical standard. This point also lies exactly at the intersection of consumer sentiment and policy trends. The FTC rule explicitly states that displaying prices without disclosing the total price is an issue, and Casino Royale is turning this into its sales message. When the audience hears this, their reaction is often very direct and instinctive. If they can do it, I don't need to accept this anymore. It's the feeling of, I really have a choice, that makes people feel lighter, not just saving a few dozen dollars. In modern Vegas, sometimes the older casinos, hotels, can sell something the Strip is lacking: simplicity. Simplicity isn't cheap. It's a feeling of not being defensive. It's the feeling of not needing to read the invoice like a contract. And when a place on the Strip chooses to live by simple, it suddenly makes the resort fee model at other places seem less justifiable. If the Strip has exceptions, what is downtown where traditional values are even stronger doing to directly address visitor fatigue? Is the resort fee the price of amenities, or is it the price of guests having no other choice? And if transparency becomes the standard, who will have to change? The hotels or Vegas itself? And to answer, we leave the Strip and head toward Fremont, where many places don't play the optional or daily waiver game. They simply say, we don't charge a resort fee, period. 4 Queens states directly in the FAQ section of their official website, the 4 Queens never charges a resort fee. This is a permanent statement, not a seasonal program, not select dates, not a limited time offer. And so, it creates a stronger kind of trust. For tourists, the difference between waive and never charges isn't just about money, it's about feeling, whether they can predict the total cost from the start. Downtown is taking advantage of the space left by the Strip. As the Strip becomes increasingly associated with the image of fees, 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 downtown sells a sense of the old, but rare. Old Vegas, clear and straightforward. And in a context where visitor numbers are starting to hesitate, that's worth more than people think. According to contextual data, visitor volume decreased in Q1 to 2025 as customers become more discerning. They will seek certain value rather than flashiness, with the risk of unexpected surprises at checkout. Clearly, no one wants to feel played. Downtown, through places like the 4 Queens, offers an almost system-defyingly simple answer: don't charge that fee. And, when the fees are dropped, the debate also changes on its own. It's no longer am I poor, but rather am I respected? People don't want to ask anyone for a discount, they just want to be quoted the correct price. Therefore, 4 Queens isn't just using no resort fee as a competitive tactic. They turned it into a brand commitment, a promise that customers don't need to be defensive. And if downtown is winning, it's probably not because it's cheaper, but because it makes customers feel lighter. If you go back to Vegas, are you going back to the Strip or back to the old feeling? But downtown also has a location that makes the story more thought-provoking. No resort fees. And it carries history, something modern Vegas tries to sell through marketing but can't produce. And that's when we met Binion's Hotel Apache. If 4 Queens was a straightforward statement about no resort fees, Binion's Hotel Apache took the story in a different direction. History as evidence. Binions in Fremont, Palm. Downtown is often noted for not charging a resort fee, and it's a familiar choice for old-school properties where experience is sold through consistency rather than through surcharges. The selling point of Binions isn't just that they don't charge a fee. It lies in the fact that they sell something that modern Vegas would cost a lot of money to simulate. A sense of authenticity, history, memory, and familiarity take over the role of marketing. On the Strip, many resorts rely on upselling and add-ons to increase total revenue, while classic downtown often relies on consistency and transparency to maintain trust. And when tourists are already exhausted by late-appearing fees, transparency becomes a new kind of luxury. In reality, not everything that increases in price in Vegas is a made-up fee. Nevada has a 9% live entertainment tax, a tax that makes shows and entertainment more expensive due to policy mechanisms. There are real taxes, fees, that businesses can't avoid. But the resort fee is the most strongly criticized because it's both mandatory and often appears at a time when guests feel ambushed. What tourists hate most is not paying, but being charged when they think they've already paid. That feeling turned the vacation into a psychological battle where tourists had to be constantly on guard. Binions, by simplifying its fee structure and relying on its historical narrative, became an escape for those who were tired of reading bills like contracts. But at the same time, Binions also raises a bigger question. Can Vegas survive long-term on story rather than surcharge? When a place has to rely on history to keep customers, is that a sign of decline or a way to save itself? And between a short-term offer with time constraints and a long-term pricing philosophy that needs no explanation, which do you believe in more? Leaving downtown. The story begins to unfold a different Vegas. A Vegas that no longer centers on casinos and no longer uses resort fees as a default. This shows that the city is trying to expand its survivable population. Wyndham Grand Desert represents a very different model. Vegas without casinos. It focuses on accommodation, swimming pools, small kitchens, and living spaces, targeting families and those who want to control their spending. If the Strip is the stage for bright lights and add-ons, then off-Strip is like a more practical option, less stimulating, but also less stressful. In the off-Strip group, no resort fee isn't just about saving a few dozen dollars. It's a competitive advantage because it provides what visitors need most: predictable total cost. When you know how much you'll pay from the start, you don't need to be defensive. And when you don't have to be defensive, that's when you truly feel like you're on vacation. Price transparency is no longer just a trend in the market. It's gradually becoming the rule of the game. The FTC rule targets both lodging and ticketing, meaning it requires the true total price to be displayed, which is shifting from a trend to a regulation, a sign that the government recognizes this as an issue directly affecting consumers. Source 1. Source 2. As transparency standards increase, low overhead capital models will become even more persuasive in encouraging tourists to return. But it doesn't stop at the resort fee. Who is really deciding the price you pay? The DOJ filed an amicus brief in a lawsuit alleging that Las Vegas hotels use pricing algorithms to coordinate price increases in a way that could violate antitrust laws. Bloomberg Law and Legal Dive reported that the DOJ argued the dismissal was incorrect, because much of the evidence was in the defendant's hands and discovery was needed. This strikes directly at the visitor's feelings. You think you're paying market price, but you might be paying the price of an automated pricing system where you can't see, understand, or control. Therefore, off-Strip doesn't just compete on cheapness, they compete on trust. We don't play that game. And this is the second biggest cliffhanger of the entire video. If the algorithm and hidden fees are making consumers feel manipulated, The final question is whether Vegas will choose true transparency, or just change the way it hides things to continue maintaining the old model. You can forgive the high price, but can you forgive the feeling of being nickel and dimed? And when the law has to intervene to make the market tell the truth, how much trust is left? Desert Rose represents a group of resorts that are emerging as a clear alternative. Quiet value. It's located near the Strip to maintain convenience, but it doesn't follow the noisy and stimulating pace of a casino. What Desert Rose prioritizes is not bright lights or complex experience packages, but space, comfort, and a predictable vacation. This is the kind of place people come not to go big, but to avoid stressing out even while on vacation. And that's also a direct point of contact with the current consumer psychology. They don't want any more worries. They don't want the fine print, last-minute fees, or the feeling of having to keep a defensive layer just to avoid being legally pickpocketed. What they want is certainty. When a resort says no resort fee, what they're really selling isn't just a lower price, it's the feeling of being respected through transparency. This shift also doesn't come solely from emotions. It is backed by a very clear policy trend. The FTC rule sets a general standard. Businesses can still charge fees, but they must clearly display the total true price, rather than letting customers piece together hidden fees at the end of the booking process. The ultimate goal is to reduce the feeling of being tricked, something that erodes consumer trust, not just their money. And as transparency standards are raised, places that chose no resort fee from the start will turn that into a competitive advantage, as they won't need to explain to guests why their bill is longer than what guests initially saw. At the state level, Reuters shows that Texas and many other states have directly targeted the hidden fees model on booking platforms, considering it a practice that misleads consumers about the total price. This directly impacts customer habits. They begin to doubt the displayed prices. They start comparing more closely, and they begin to look for places that don't add extra later. Therefore, the fact that a resort in the quiet value group doesn't charge a resort fee is not just a perk. To some extent, it's a statement against drip pricing, the type of pricing that makes customers guess the true total cost. Of course, Vegas still has a peak season. Vegas still has big events that drive up prices, and not every price increase is a made-up fee. But what's changing most clearly isn't the price, but the tolerance of tourists to feeling manipulated. When consumers start to leave, not because they can't afford it, but because they don't want to be treated as revenue. The market is forced to adjust, whether slowly or quickly. Consumers don't need to boycott Vegas 100%. They just need to boycott one type of business, the kind that relies on confusing customers to make extra money. When enough people do this, the market will have to change its approach, because trust is the most difficult asset to regain. Do you want Vegas to become cheaper? Or do you just want Vegas to be honest about its prices? And if transparency becomes the standard, will Vegas return as a destination, or just as a prettier cash machine that still runs on the same system? When a city has to waive fees to keep customers, the real issue isn't the fees themselves, it's about trust. The story of resort fees isn't just about a few dozen dollars per night. It's about feeling, whether you still feel the price is worth paying. Vegas isn't necessarily collapsing, but clearly, Vegas is changing its tune because visitors have started speaking the language every system understands: choice. Some places waive the resort fee. Some places make it optional. Some places don't collect right away. It's not because they suddenly became kinder, but because they understood a very simple thing. Trust, once lost, is very expensive to regain. And if there's a practical lesson here, it's this. You don't need to boycott Vegas 100%. You just need to boycott one type of business, the kind that relies on keeping customers in the dark and then collecting money in the shadows. When enough people do that, the market will have to self-correct. It's not about morality. It's about survival. If you find this video helpful, please click like to let me know you want more investigative topics like this. Sharing with a friend who's preparing to go to Vegas, because sometimes good information can save money and save a lot of frustration. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next videos about those small fees that cause big changes in real life. This video is informative and analytical, based on reputable public sources available at the time of production. Room rates, resort fees, promotional terms, and policies are subject to change over time, by booking date and by package. I do not represent any hotel or organization, and I recommend that you always check directly on the official website before booking.